Hello and welcome to another episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Ginny Dietrich.
And Ginny, today is a one-size-fits-all day. We're going to talk about
Oh,
how
good.
every agency is exactly the same, and all you have to do is go through a simple checklist, and you'll know how to manage your business successfully.
Man, that's going to make life so much easier. Awesome. Yes.
It is. I mean,
You're not
it
serious
is
with
nice
it
that
either.
it's just all about a simple formula. No real thought
Mm,
involved.
okay. I wish that were the case,
Yes.
unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I think in all seriousness, I think one of the challenges that agency leaders have these days is there are a lot of resources out there. There's this podcast. There are plenty of other podcasts like it. There are lots of articles. There are YouTube channels. There are books. And a lot of it is framed as we do here in terms of agencies, right? The Agency Leadership Podcast. We don't specify what kind of agency.
Mhm.
As
Mhm.
we talk, it becomes more clear, where our general knowledge is. And so therefore where our general slant is. But on the surface, we're just talking about agencies. And there are a lot of other really smart people out there who are talking about agencies and giving you advice. The problem is that not every agency is the same. There are small agencies, there are large agencies, there are PR agencies, there are ad agencies, there are digital agencies. There are all these different permutations of it. And understanding and trying to figure out how that all fits and how to understand the advice you're being given is different. And so you need to appreciate that those differences exist and understand the advice you're getting, where it's coming from.
Yeah, I mean, yes. And you're right that it's not a one size fits all, unfortunately. And having worked both in a large global PR firm where it was all PR and having worked in an ad agency where we were building a PR department, they were completely different. They have different structures of teams. They have a production department, they have an account management, client service department, they have creative, they have copywriting, they have art and graphic design, and we have PR. So
Right.
like that simplifies it, but that's generally how it works. So I think you're right, depending on the agency and depending on the expertise that you provide is going to help you craft sort of the organizational model or chart around the types of people that you hire.
Yeah. And so when you're out there and you're consuming this advice, if you're listening to us, you know that our background is primarily in PR, marketing
Mhm.
communications, peso model type agencies. Do we have other experience? Yes, I've run a digital agency. I've got a lot of other experiences. We can talk about those things as well. But most of our advice is centered on those PR, Marcoms, peso agency types. And so there are others out there who you'll go and they'll say, well, an account manager should do this or that, or you should have a project manager. Most PR agencies aren't going to follow that same advice for what an account manager should do.
Right.
Most PR agencies aren't going to even have a project manager.
Yep.
There are some smart people in the agency world who will talk about how important it is to have a traffic manager. Most PR agency owners don't even know what a traffic
Don't even
manager
I mean
is. I will have them say, I was listening to such and such a podcast and they were talking about how valuable a traffic manager is. What's a traffic manager? Do I need one?
no, you don't.
No, because you're running a different kind of business.
Right.
And so it's the same thing. You have a lot of the folks who run the high volume agencies, the SEO, PPC type agencies. They'll be out there talking about how, oh, you need a VA, you need a salesperson. And for those kinds of agencies, those kinds of things can work. For
Yep.
most PR and Marcoms agencies, not so much.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree. I think there are some exceptions to the rule for sure. Because I've crafted my agency around the peso model. We have core expertise in paid, earned, shared, and owned media, and because of that, we do have a project manager. But I think we got to, 15 or maybe 18 employees before we hired him. So even still, you still had everybody managing the client. There is one point of contact before we hired the project manager. There was one point of contact for each client account, and then all the earned media or all the media types fell into that. But usually the point of contact was doing something like content, owned media or earned media, whatever was most important to the client. And then they were sort of the ones running it. So the point is that in a PR firm, it's typically the people who are doing the work that are also doing the account management, the client service, and the project management, making sure the work gets done.
Yeah, and the roles even within, as you point out, a PR or Marcoms agency, based on your size, things are going to change. So it's not
Yep.
even just
Yep.
about the
Yep.
kind of agency you are, it's the size, right?
Yep.
At 5 or 10 people, a PR agency is going to be almost exclusively generalists. You'll have
Yep.
people who have a little bit of extra ability on the writing side, maybe a little bit extra on the media relations side, but you're not going to have the well-defined structures. I mean, when I worked in large agencies, we had an entire writing department, we had an entire
Hmm.
creative department,
Yep.
right? And those that made sense. At 5 or 10 employees, that doesn't make sense for most of you out there. You don't want to have 2 people who are nothing but writers, and because they're probably not going to have enough work to
Enough work.
fill
Right.
40 hours a week each.
Right.
And so you need to be thoughtful about those. And as you hear some of these things, and as you talk to other agency owners about how they're set up, you need to appreciate how is what they're doing the same or different from what you're doing, so that you can draw the right conclusions for the structure that you want to put in place with your team.
The other mistake I see, especially PR firm agency owner, PR firm owners making, is that there's sort of a hierarchy traditionally, especially at the large firms. So you start as an account coordinator, you go to assistant AE, then to account executive, senior AE, account supervisor, managing supervisor, VP, SVP, and on, right? Like that's typically the organizational chart. And what I see agency owners, the mistake I see them making is they say, okay, well, I have to hire an account coordinator, and I have to hire an AAE, and I have to hire an AE, and they sort of fit people into that, and they try to fit people into that process or that organizational structure without taking a step back and looking at what they really need. Maybe you need somebody with like 5 to 7 years of experience, and they might need an account supervisor or management supervisor title, but because they only have 5 to 7 years of experience, you want them in that AE or SAE level, and that's just not the case. So I think you have to really step back and go, okay, hang on a second, what kind of work needs to be done? How many years of experience do I need for the person to have? And what kind of title are they looking for? For us, as I was building my agency, I looked for people who had the experience I need, and I sort of let them dictate the title. And in some cases, it bit them in the butt a little bit, because I remember a couple of times people were like, oh, I really want to be chief content officer, or I really want to be vice president. And they didn't have enough experience, but titles didn't matter to me. So I was like, okay, you can be chief content officer. I don't care. And then they went to get another job, and from an ego perspective, got quote unquote demoted like 2 or 3 titles. They didn't get demoted in terms of pay or anything or responsibilities, but from their perspective, they were demoted in terms of titles. So I also think you have to think about those kinds of things and have those honest conversations. Like, I'm totally cool making you a chief content officer if that's the title you want, but know that if and when you leave us, you're probably not going to get that same title. So should we think about what that might look like for your career path in general, not just at this agency? And some people are agreeable and some people are not. And that's up to you. But I think the important thing is like figuring out what skill set you need and the years of experience that you need, and then work them into a title that way versus trying to follow that pattern.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, certainly thinking about, we've talked about career progressions and title paths, and and all that kind of thing in the past. But one of the things to think about is not just how it impacts their career going forward if you have title inflation. It's also what your flexibility is in restructuring your own business,
Sure.
because you want to be careful about giving someone a title that's so large that it's hard to layer them down the
Yep.
road if you need
Yep.
to. If you need to
That's a
bring in
great
someone
point.
with
That's a
more
really great
experience, right?
point.
So if you've got
Yep.
someone as chief content officer, I mean, about the only thing you can layer them with is a chief operating officer or CEO
Yeah.
or president or
Yeah.
something like that. There's not much else that you have that you can logically at least make them subservient to in a way that doesn't feel weird, right? I mean,
Right.
you don't have a chief
That's a
content
really great
officer
point.
report to a vice president or something like that typically.
Great. Yeah.
And so you want to be thoughtful about those. But as we're thinking about titles, that's another area. Even if you compare PR agencies and you look at their title structures, the most junior title for all of them is likely going to be different, right?
Yeah. Right.
Some of
Yes.
the junior person is an account coordinator. A lot, it's account executive. A
It's
lot,
80.
it's
Yeah.
account manager.
Yep.
The irony is that in most agencies, an account manager doesn't manage and an account executive is not an executive. right? But
Yes.
those are the common titles
Uh-huh.
but I've been involved with
It's a
agencies where an
great
account
way.
executive was senior to an account
Yeah.
manager, and I've been ones where an account manager is senior to an account executive. So, and it's one of the reasons why salary surveys are so problematic in this field because if I've got an
Also a
account
great
manager
point.
and
Yep.
and particularly when you're looking across different kinds of agencies, right? Because in an ad agency, an account manager is actually a fairly senior experienced person who's managing the relationship. In most PR agencies, an account manager isn't that senior, isn't running the actual relationship. They may manage the day to day of the project,
Right.
but it's
Right.
typically going to be someone senior to them who's actually quote unquote owns the relationship with the
Yep.
client. And that's the person who's responsible for growing the account and retaining the account. It's not the account manager themselves. Now that can be different, right? Because it depends on how you structure your own agency. And so you need to be careful as you're hearing even us talk, because we'll use it based on our own experience and how we've
Right.
structured things, but it may not be the same as what you're doing. And so you want to look at the big picture lessons you can take as opposed to, oh, well, I was told that I should have an account manager who's out, and it's their job to grow accounts. If it's someone 2 years out of college, I'm not going to
No.
say it's their responsibility to grow the
No.
account, right?
No.
That doesn't make any
No.
sense at all. It's not their job
No.
to come up with big picture strategy. I mean, should they be able to manage day-to-day stuff? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But, bigger stuff, you can't just hand that off to someone junior most of the time.
Right. Totally agree with that. It's kind of like I'll say to a client, they'll say, "Oh yeah, I think that my 15-year-old kid can handle social media." And I'm like, do you want your 15-year-old kid to go golfing with your number one client without you? No, no, you don't. So why would you let them talk externally to your customers and prospects? Like same thing, right? You're not going to expect your junior level employee to do those kinds of things. Can they be in the meetings? For sure. Can they observe and listen? Absolutely. Should they be the one in charge of it? No freaking way. So the other thing I would advise is really pay attention to what everybody advises, of course, but talk to other agency owners and understand, like, this is the world in which we live, and this is the type of person I'm looking for, and these are the types of titles they may or may not have. So you can talk to other agency owners and say, hey, listen, what do you call your person who handles media relations at like 5 to 7 years of experience, or 3 to 5, or 8 to 10, or whatever happens to be? And you'll probably get, if you talk to 5 different agency owners, you'll probably get 5 different answers, but it'll at least give you an idea of, okay, if we're thinking about this and I want to flip myself into that process, then where does it make me most comfortable? And so you start to look at it and really understand. Saga is a great place for that. You have a Slack community. The SpinSucks community is probably about half agency owners. You can do that. PRSA has Counselors Academy, which is all agency owners. You can join that. So there are lots of places where you can just ask that question, and understand what titles are being used for different levels and different types of experience, so that you can start to figure out, okay, and like I said, you may get 5 different answers from 5 different agency owners, but it gives you enough basis and foundation to understand, this is how I'm going to structure it, and give you enough to be able to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, you can learn so much from those things, and I would also say try to avoid fixating too much on titles. Focus on what the actual role is,
Yep.
what they're doing. So as you're
Yes.
as you're asking people about how they're structured, what they have for things, understand what those people actually do. Because
Yes.
before, if you hear someone say you should have a project manager, cool, sit down and actually ask them, what does that person do? And then think about your own agency and put together a job description for what that person would do on a day-to-day basis, and then figure out, will it actually help to have this person? Can you get this in one individual, or have you actually described a unicorn that's actually three different specialist positions rolled into one, and your odds of finding it are going to be tiny? Is it something that you need, but you only need 10 hours a week, and so it's going to have to be rolled into something else because you can't, or you're going to find someone to do it part-time
Yep.
because you don't have 40 hours a week to fill it.
Yep.
And I think when you start doing those things and you start actually sitting down and asking yourself those tough questions about, what is this person actually going to do? How do they fit in with the rest of the mix? That's where you start to figure out whether it fits or not. And I hate to harp on VAs, but VAs are one of those things that a lot of agency coaches out there will tell you, oh, it's a lifesaver to have a VA. For most of you, it isn't. Because for most of you, you're not doing that much actual admin stuff. And so if you're not spending hours and hours a day doing admin stuff, then first of all, what you're looking for is not truly a VA. You're just looking for a contractor to do something else. And even then, you need to figure out what can they actually take off of your plate? Because so often when I've talked with folks who are looking at hiring a VA, they tell me here's what they can do, and it's maybe 2 or 3 hours a day, but the amount of time it will take them is half of that to manage it. So if you're spending an hour and a half to manage getting 3 hours off your plate, what's the point?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So there is a time and place for all of these different roles. It may not be at 5 people. It may not be at 10 people. It may not even be at 20 or 25. It may be further down the road. It may be if you add a different kind of service. To your point, if you start doing the full peso model, yes, you're going to start to need some specialists because it's hard to have someone who has all of the different
Yes, that is a
specialties within the
unicorn.
peso model, in
That is,
their under their own hat.
yeah.
They exist, but they are unicorns.
Yeah. Yeah. I found that out pretty quickly as we were building the agency around that, 10 years ago. Almost no one can do all four. So
Right.
you do have to find specialists. And I will tell you that as we were doing it, we didn't have full-time people that were focused on each. We had contractors and, we brought them in as needed. And eventually we got to the point where we needed full-time people under each media type, but it took us 6 or 7 years to get there. So the same goes for you. If you're looking for specialists, it doesn't have to be a full-time employee either.
Right. Because it all comes back to understanding what your objectives are, what you need from a resource perspective, and then figuring out how you get there. If you approach it from I'm told that I need to have account managers doing this, and I need to have project managers to do that, and I need a traffic manager and all these different things, you shouldn't be starting with those titles. You shouldn't be starting with thinking the roles at the big picture. You should start looking at the individual tasks that need to be accomplished and figure out who can do that on your current team, who has the bandwidth, who has the capability. If they don't have either of those or one of those, then do you need to hire someone who has that ability? Do you need to find a contractor? Do you need to find a partner agency to work with? Whatever it may, there's a lot of different ways to solve it, but you need to understand what your actual need is as opposed to latching on to the notion of a project manager or an account manager or a sales rep or whatever.
Yeah, I would say that if you're listening to or you have the mindset that you have to find roles like that, we have to find an account manager, we have to do this, we have to do that. That is the fastest way to zero profit. And I speak from experience. So don't do that.
Right.
Take Chip's advice and really look at what is it that we need. Who is it that can fill that role? And if we have any gaps, can we fill in with contractors for 5 or 10 hours a week to do that?
Right. And understand the perspectives are going to be entirely different based on the experiences of the person sharing that, whether that's a fellow agency owner
Sure.
or a coach or consultant like us or something else. We all have our own experiences. We're all speaking about a specific kind of agency, which is a subset of all agencies. And if you understand that those things are different and you understand that your agency, even if you're a 5-person PR agency, you're not the same as every other 5-person PR agency. And so
Right.
you really need to personalize your approach based on what you're trying to accomplish and what your specific needs are, not what you've heard some other peer or expert tell you.
That's for sure. Yes. Because your PR firm may be you focus completely on media relations. So that's completely different than my PR firm that doesn't. So you also just have to, it's a great point. You have to think about what the perspective of the person that's giving you the advice.
Absolutely. And it's not one size fits all.
Nope.
We'll share our
Unfortunately not.
perspective, take our perspective, keep listening to us, digest it, figure out what's useful to you and where we're just full of hot air, and feel free to stop listening at that point. But you've been listening all the way through to the
All
end
the
of
way
this episode,
through. That's right.
and we appreciate that. So that brings us to the end of this episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
I'm Gini Dietrich.
And it depends.